Hey solo gamers, thanks for checking out How's It Play Solo. I'm Mack Kern, and today I'm taking a look at A Feast for Odin, which is a huge new worker placement game from Uwe Rosenberg. The game is for 1 to 4 players, and there are tons of actions and strategies to explore. Let's take a look. In A Feast for Odin, your goal is to accumulate as many points as possible over the course of the game. And there's a lot of different ways to score points. You can accumulate silver. You can build a couple different types of ships. You can use the ships that you built to emigrate, which makes them worth more points at the end of the game. You can breed animals. You can play occupation cards that have in-game effects and also score points at the end. You can build sheds and houses. You can explore foreign lands, and you can even gain loot from plundering. There are a ton of different resource tiles, and the game actually comes with these organizational trays, which are important to the gameplay. Resource conversion is prominently featured, and over the course of the game, you have plenty of opportunities to upgrade your orange tiles to red, your red tiles to green, and your green tiles to blue. And different colors of tiles have different purposes. Towards the end of every round, there's a feast phase, and you can use these red and orange tiles, which all represent food, during the feast. Green and blue tiles can be placed on your home board to increase the amount of income you get every round, give you bonuses, and also to reduce the number of negative points you score at the end of the game. Depending on whether you want to play the short or the long game, A Feast for Odin is played over the course of 6 or 7 rounds. There are 12 phases in a round, which sounds like a lot, but most of these phases are just minor upkeep. At the beginning of every round, you get a new Viking to use as a worker during the action phase. 4 times over the course of the game, you perform a harvest, and harvests basically consist of each player getting a fixed number of orange tiles for free. Also, 4 times during the game, the exploration boards that players are able to claim are updated. So these boards are lettered A through D, and in certain rounds, certain boards are flipped, and all of the other tiles gain 2 silver to incentivize players to take those boards. Every round, players draw a random weapon card, and these weapon cards help players when they take hunting, whaling, or pillaging actions on the action board. During the action phase, players can place workers on the action board to perform actions, and one really interesting thing about this game is that different actions have a different worker cost. So everything in this first column only requires 1 worker, while everything in the second requires 2, and then 3 and 4 in the third and fourth columns. And you get a bonus when you take an action in the third and fourth column. Anytime you take an action that requires 3 workers, you get to draw an occupation card. These cards, as I mentioned earlier, have in-game effects and can also score you some points at the end of the game. When you take an action that requires 4 workers, you actually get to put an occupation card into play. Now, there are other ways to draw and play these cards, but it's really nice to be able to do it as a bonus for choosing those more expensive actions. There are too many action spaces to cover in detail, but I'll give a brief idea of the different types of actions you can perform during this phase. You can spend the appropriate resources to build houses and sheds, and these give you an opportunity to score some extra points at the end of the game. They also give you an opportunity to earn bonuses over the course of the game. If you have the appropriate resources, you can build ships, you can acquire livestock, you can go to the market to gain different goods tiles, you can turn one type of good or resource into other types of goods and resources, you can acquire resources from these mountain strips, you can upgrade your goods tiles, you can, if you have the right type of ship, you can explore, which means you gain an exploration board, and these give you additional opportunities to earn income. They also provide you with more opportunities to gain in-game bonuses and end-game points. And you can spend money to emigrate with your ships, which makes them worth more points at the end of the game. It also reduces the amount of feeding you have to perform during the feast phase. You can draw and play occupation cards, and then there are two different types of action spaces, the hunting spaces and the raiding/pillaging spaces that involve dice rolling. Depending on which hunting space you choose, you roll either an 8-sided or 12-sided die up to 3 times. And the whaling hunting spaces are unique because they require you to have at least one whaling ship, and the amount of ore on that whaling ship can modify the result of your dice roll. Let's say that I choose to hunt game, and I roll a 3 on my final roll. I can pay 3 of any combination of wood or bow and arrow cards to be considered successful. And so if I do that, I get the depicted goods tiles as my reward. Now, if I can't or don't want to pay the required resources, then I can choose to fail my hunting, and in that case, I would receive 1 wood and 1 bow and arrow card as a consolation for failing that hunting. Pillaging works in a similar way. For all of the raiding and pillaging spaces, you have to have a long ship before you can perform that action. You still roll a die 3 times, but you want to roll high. You can modify the result of your roll by spending longsword cards and also stone. And every blue tile and also the special tiles in the game have a sword value, and so on a successful raiding or pillaging action, you can take a tile with the sword value of what you rolled or lower. And anything, if you have an outcome of 5 or less after you've modified that with the long swords and the stone, then that's considered a failure. And so you would get a long sword and a stone, and then maybe even be able to send some of your workers back. There are also several actions that you can perform at any point in time without using any workers to do so, and probably the most important of those is placing goods on your boards. Now that includes your home board, it includes any sheds and houses you've built, and it also includes any exploration boards that you have. And each of these has different rules for what you can place on them. I'm going to focus on the home board. On the home board, you're only allowed to place blue and green goods tiles. You can also place silver, and you can place ore. And the restriction with green goods is that they're not allowed to be adjacent to each other. So they can touch corner to corner, but they can't touch side to side. In general, you're allowed to place goods tiles wherever you like, unless you're covering up a space on the income diagonal. So all of these spaces with the coins and the outstretched hand, those are part of the income diagonal, which determines how much income you receive every round. So I can't cover up this space on the income diagonal unless I have or am covering everything to the left of that space, everything below it, and everything in the box defined by those 2 lines. So I can't cover this up until I've covered up everything else to the left and below it. Now these bonus spaces that depict certain goods and resources are allowed to be covered up, but they're also already considered to be covered for the purposes of the income diagonal. And if you're able to completely surround one of these spaces, you receive that resource or good in all subsequent bonus phases. After the action phase is complete, the player who placed workers last receives the start player marker for the next round. All players receive income according to the lowest exposed space on their income diagonal, and then animal breeding occurs. So if you have 2 animals of the same type, you flip one of those animals to its pregnant side, or if you already have at least 1 pregnant animal, then you flip all pregnant animals of that type to their regular side, and you gain another animal of that type. After animal breeding, you perform the feast phase, and as the game goes on, you have to pay more and more goods during the feast, because every time you add a new Viking, you are gaining another spot at the table. Now, when you play goods tiles for the feast, you can only use orange and red tiles, and you can also use silver pieces. But orange tiles can't touch other orange tiles, and red tiles can't touch other red tiles. Additionally, if you want to play 2 of the exact same goods tiles, so if I wanted to play peas twice, I would have to play the second vertically. So you're kind of penalized for doing that, unless, of course, you're using multiple of the square pieces, because when you turn them on their side, they take up just as much space. For every square that you don't cover during the feast phase, you lose 3 points. After the feast, players receive bonus goods and resources according to the bonus squares that they've surrounded on their boards. You remove a resource from every existing mountain strip, and then you add a new mountain strip to the game. And then finally, players remove all of their workers from the action board before starting the next round. The only significant difference in the solitaire game is that you use 2 different colors of workers, and you alternate which color you use from round to round. In the first round, you place all of your workers on the board, but you don't remove them until the end of the second round. And the workers that you place in the second round don't get removed till the end of the third round, and so on. And in that way, the workers that you placed in the previous round of the game keep you from selecting the same actions in the current round of the game. And that really makes the board feel a lot tighter and more like a multiplayer experience, because you don't have all 60 plus actions available to you at the beginning of every round. The rules also have a few suggestions to reduce upkeep during the solo game, such as instead of revealing and setting up a new mountain strip towards the end of every round, you simply set all of those up at the beginning of the game and just keep track of which ones become available over the course of the game. I've been extremely happy with A Feast for Odin so far, and I feel pretty confident in saying that it's my favorite game of 2016. I've been especially happy with the solitaire experience. When I initially read the rules, I had some concerns about replayability. I didn't see a lot of variety in the setup, and that led me to believe that maybe the game would get stale. However, my plays have proven that not to be the case. There's quite a bit of variability in the weapon cards that you can draw, a little bit of variability that comes from the push your luck elements of hunting and raiding and pillaging. You have some variety in the mountain strips and the way that those are added to the game. But probably most importantly, you get a lot of variety in those occupation cards. You start the game with 1, and you have plenty of opportunities to accumulate additional occupation cards over the course of the game. And there are a lot of those occupation cards, and they all do very different things. Some of them have immediate effects, some of them have ongoing effects, some of them give you tons of points, some of them give you really powerful in-game effects. There's just a lot of variety there and a lot to explore. And not only that, but the action board is so huge. There are so many different types of strategies that you can explore from game to game. And then the variability within the game just creates a bigger decision tree as you start playing. Also, I think that in a lot of Uwe Rosenberg games, players don't like to play them solitaire because they miss the interaction of other players blocking their spots. And while that could definitely be a concern for people with this game, to me, it does not feel significantly different from a multiplayer game. I really think it's a great design choice to have your workers from the previous round block the actions that you're able to perform in the current round. I feel like that more than makes up for the lack of other player interactions, because for one, it prevents you from spamming a certain action spot. So if you need sheep, you can't get sheep from the same action spot multiple times in a row. You'll have to find another action spot that maybe costs more workers to get your sheep from. And so you have to plan ahead for the future, and also you get that feeling of a multiplayer game where not everything is available to you all the time. I've had a lot of fun exploring A Feast for Odin, and I think that I'll have a lot more fun exploring it. There's just so much to offer in this game. If I have one complaint with the solitaire experience, it would only be that setup can kind of take a long time in comparison to how long it actually takes to play. Because the solo game, once you have everything down, once you figure out the rules, you can play a solo game in under an hour if you're moving along pretty quickly. And setup can seem like it takes a long time in comparison to that, but if you have the luxury of being able to leave this game set up, it's great to play a couple times before you put it back in the box. If you are interested in Uwe Rosenberg, if you're interested in Euros, if you're interested in resource conversion, worker placement, you owe it to yourself to check out A Feast for Odin. It's a great game. Check it out.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.